I wanted to say one thing about just a forensic psychologist role in this, although obviously there was a lack of that. But, and let me know what you have on this, is that at some point I'm looking at the viewpoint of a child who, as a psychologist, I would protect them from testify. I would be so cautious on that. But at some point, I understand there was a psychologist who met in the judge's chambers to discuss whether this child could appreciate, and I don't know the details of that
Truth or lies. So we need to
conversation,
talk
truth or lies, but somehow he was cleared to testify. And I have a lot of questions about that I would, as a person that protects children, I don't.
Well,
I'm going to attempt. I'll try to attempt to answer this. I'll try to attempt to answer this as best I can. You guys can cut through the fluff here and tell me where I get it wrong. This psychologist, the trained professional who was deemed the expert. Now, I'm not sure of her credentials. I'm going to double check on this now because it's quite interesting. She was with him for most of the time. She was with him when he drew this picture a few days before trial, which was said to be the damning, imagery from a child that puts her mother in prison. Nowhere along the lines does it appear that he went through any sort of psychological evaluation or discussion by a psychologist. There's nothing within the notes that I have. There's nothing to say that he sat in any progressive or serious discussion about his mental health. I'm kind of at a loss at this. I just, she was with him the whole way. She walked him to the bench when he sat down. The judge then took control of the situation. The judge essentially, with the prosecution, asked him, "Do you know the difference between a truth and a lie?" Now, this is a question that was asked, but the police had asked all the children they interviewed. Now, mind you, they interviewed the two children of the boyfriend, one of which was at the scene the entire time. They interviewed him without the presence of Child Protection Services, and he was 14, but he was given permission by the mother. And he was 14. I'm going to ignore that one for the time being. But they did at one point suggest that he might have had something to do with the children sexually because blood was found on the pool and in the underwear of the deceased. But they never went that direction. The judge essentially spoke to both the prosecution and the defense, saying, if the child reveals anything that would suggest that he doesn't understand what the truth and a lie is, we'll stop right there and we'll put an end to this. So the first question out of the mouth of the prosecutor to little AJ, now 7 years old, 7-year-old. And when you see him, he looks about 5. Let's be fair. He looks younger than 7. His first questions are, do you know the difference between a truth and a lie? And he said, no, sir. You're on mute, Dana.
You're muted.
Yes, I heard that. I watched the testimony. As soon as I heard that, I said, oh my God. And then it continues to play out and no one stopped it. And then from there got worse and worse, because at some point they're even asking him other questions that are revealing that he isn't really fully aware of everything that's going on. Like, do you see your mother in the courtroom?
Yes.
And he says no.
But again, I can kind of understand that. I can kind of understand why he said no, because here's a 6-year-old who's told, he's moved into this other house. He's in with a foster family. They're very concerned about him, as you would be. The child, they lived in a house this is not a perfect home situation. The house was not brilliant. They were not a wealthy family. This was not a beautiful upbringing for AJ. I'm not suggesting for any moment that he was plucked out of the ivory tower. They were in a low-income, double-wide trailer in northern Florida. It's not a beautiful living situation. He was certainly living in a much nicer financially situation with the foster family, and they were very concerned about his welfare. I'm kind of losing my point here with the child because I'm quite upset about this. It's the fact that he loses all of his family and everything, and he is told, your mama's in prison. And he is probably told, your mama's in prison because that's where she belongs. So he's taken to this court, and this is the power of the court. Look, I shit myself when I go to court. I crap myself when I have I crap myself when the police lights go on behind me, or when a cop pulls up behind me and I think I might have gone through a yellow light. Okay?
Yeah.
Okay, and I'm in my 50s. Okay? This kid is 7 with learning disabilities, and he's walked into this courtroom where he's asked all these big questions by people. He already says he doesn't know the difference of truth and lie. When he's asked, do you see your mother in the courtroom? He says no. And he probably says no because he's been told so many times, your mother is in prison. He was probably never told, you're going to see your mother today.
Yeah. So I watched that as well. And so again, when an investigation is being done, when you've got a young, and I've interviewed children, as an investigator. And one of the things that we always do, and this is how you're trained to do this, and when you go to investigator school and you learn how to conduct interviews, particularly of children, is you have to establish their competence, their ability to differentiate, one, reality from fantasy. So that's important, but also truth from lie. In other words, you have to establish that. So you ask simple questions of a child, such as, I'm holding up this yellow marker right here.
Yeah.
To the child. If I were to tell you that this marker was a lime green or a green marker, would I be telling the truth or would I be telling a lie? Right. And then you look to see what the child says about that. I didn't see them do that particular test, that truth lie sort of test, other than
They
asking
do.
about. They asked about the mother. They said, from what I recall watching, is that,
Yeah.
if I were to tell you that your mother was in the courtroom, would I be telling the truth or would I be telling a lie? Is that your understanding of how they asked that?
No,
And
they actually do within the testimony ask him, am I wearing brown shoes? Would you say I was wearing orange shoes? What would you say?
Yeah.
And the child laughs. He goes, no, they're brown. Don't be. So you do know the difference between a truth and a lie. And he,
Yeah.
yes, sir. Like, I guess I do. It is really that whole 5 minutes of that discussion of whether he understands truth or lies. It's really murky waters for me. But again, within 20 minutes, he's saying he did it.
Yeah. Well, so you mentioned that he had learning disabilities. Did you? And
Yeah.
where did you get that information? Was that later?
That's the mom and the grandmom both say that he
Okay.
and within the notes within the court documents there
Yeah.
is reams and reams of paperwork. These children both were bedwetters.
Yeah.
That there's a lot of problems. Adriana, the victim, she was on Falkland. She had ADHD.
ADHD. Okay.
So both the children had some issues, for sure.
So yeah, back to what Dana was mentioning about this issue of competence. Best practices would be in a case like this. I think particularly if there's evidence that there could be a learning disability or there could be perhaps some kind of cognitive or intellectual deficit, particularly at his age, right at 6 years old. I would have wanted at least a full psychological evaluation, right, to make sure, one, there's not a specific learning disorder and or an intellectual disability where perhaps he's, I don't know this, but what we can do testing, we can test children to see where are they at in terms of their mental age. Because if if he has a learning disability, even though he perhaps is 6 years old and is 7 years old at the time he's testifying, he might have been, his mental age could have been a 4-year-old. We don't know that, right? And that makes a difference. And again, as to competency, and that's something that the judge has to then, make a determination as to whether or not is this child competent to actually give testimony in court. Because at a certain age, you have to be very careful because children, sometimes they can't differentiate reality and fantasy, at a very, very young age. They're at that concrete, level of reasoning. They don't understand those differences. So I'm wondering about that. That's another question I had when I was watching him testify too. Like you said, he didn't look like a 7-year-old to me on the stand. He looked younger. He looked younger than 7 years old.
And he's the
Younger
sweetest
in
little
terms of,
boy.
yeah, very.
He's a very
Yeah.
attractive. He's a very sweet little boy. He's as cute as it gets, and it just look.
Yeah.
If she did do it, it is heartbreaking. If she didn't do it, it's heartbreaking.
Well,
no matter
yeah, so
how you look at it.
Yeah, I'm curious to know what, and again, this is more, speculating, and I don't like to speculate. We like to go on facts, but what could have motivated him to, if in fact this was a falsehood, in other words, that the mother did not intentionally drown her daughter. What could explain that narrative? Like, why would he tell this story? I'm wondering
Well,
about the dynamic that could have caused that.
I've got my theory, and again, I'm going to speculate because I can, and I'm here. Let's just look at
It's speculation because we don't
let's
have
look
no
at the
everything.
options. So if we take him for his word, okay, if we take him for everything he said, army men came down from the sky in parachutes. His mother dunked her 4 times, killing her 4 times. And then his sister went to the park, and the mother went to the park and picked her up in her car. And then they had a fight in the car, and she dunked her again. This is what he told police. Okay. Then he says, when nobody else is in the room but Paul Chuck and the 2 cops, that I saw Mama with her hand over Adriana's face like this. Now, to me, and they said, where was that? And he said, by the pool. I think, my opinion, is that AJ is very clearly describing CPR. AJ saw his mother exactly as he describes.
Yeah.
Left hand over. Amanda is right-handed. So Amanda is doing CPR.
Yeah, and
generally on the chest, hurting.
And you tilt the head back oftentimes. Yeah. I mean, that's part of the process. Yeah.
A 6-year-old with learning disability sees his mother hurting his sister. Exactly as he describes.
Where are the other experts in this case? And so she passes this lie detector test. Like, where,
Well, that's not admissible, right?
No, lie detection is generally not admissible in any courts in the United States.
And of course, the prosecution will tell you, and any prosecutor, I've spoken to a few of them in a number of states, they will openly look at you and say, I know loads of people who have been prosecuted who pass lie detector tests. So lie detector tests are not true. And then I said, or you've convicted the wrong person.
Right. Well, they're an investigative tool. And can they be beaten? Yes, they can. But generally, like, if assuming we're not dealing with a psychopath, right? Psychopaths they do have the ability to control their physiology, because remember, it's a lie detection test. Is nothing more than a measure of sympathetic activation in the nervous system. It's a physiologic test of anxiety, essentially. That's what it's measuring. It's not measuring this cognitive piece that people think people lying. It's measuring a physiologic reaction to.
And his contention is that Amanda was a very cold-hearted person who didn't kill her first child, but they were making that assumption. Now that evidence of the first child was never in the trial. That was never in the trial. No,
but
appears to be known by everyone.
It was known to the investigators, and it just, I think it influenced these family dynamics, so it just taints that.
Well, it crafts a narrative, right? Because remember, the investigators are trying to put, they're looking at a narrative, like what motive, what explains this? Like, why would she have done this to her daughter?
And with the timeline of phone calls, because she's on the phone to her boyfriend at work when she yells outside to AJ, hey, where's Adriana? We got to go shopping, right? And then he initially tells the cops, then I could hear Amanda running, and I assume she ran around the house outside to find Adriana in the pool. Amanda tells the cops, well, I ran actually through the house because I was in the house on the stairs. AJ ran around the house. And they say, so you don't know, so you're testifying that Amanda was inside the house. And he goes, well, I don't know where she was. I was on the phone. I just heard her gasping, and then I heard her saying, oh my God, she's in the pool. So it became exactly how things took place became very murky. And again, it became, it was questionable. But the prosecution were able to say that, Amanda had an argument with Adriana that morning because of testimony that AJ had said. And AJ had said that she had sprayed something that smelled good, like Windex.
The Windex,
she got in trouble, and, Mom was angry at her, and it escalated. And then she took her outside to the pool and strangled her in the pool. Now, as a sort of historian and an author and a sort of, armchair Sherlock, I went, well, hold on a second. I know somebody who's got the exact same pool. It's the Sun and Sand pool, 18 8-foot round rubber pool. And I said, is there any way you could lean over that pool and strangle somebody in the water? And they said, no way, it would just collapse. The pool would literally collapse.
Yeah,
There
because
was no,
it's just
yeah,
air filled, right? Yeah, it's filled with air, right? It's a
it's essentially a
inflatable,
rubber ring inflatable pool.
yeah,
It's
inflatable
a
pool.
big
Yeah,
one, but it would collapse if you leaned over it. And so the argument is, again, one of the jurors said, hey, she's guilty because she didn't break the pool down and get her daughter out of it. But logically, if she had done that, it would have made the situation far worse than better. Actually, she was tall enough. She's 5'10". She's quite tall. She leaned
right.
right
Reached
over the
in.
pool,
Yeah,
grabbed the child, and she's strong enough and with enough. I mean, she's got rudimentary CPR training from her job at a nursing home doing the overnights. She pulls Adriana, able to carry her weight, rests her on the ground, and then begins CPR. Now, if we take all the stories together, it's hard to know exactly what happened. But Amanda has never told a different story than the one.
I
She's
noted
never
that.
it has
yeah,
And she's
never changed.
maintained her innocence.
It just hasn't changed. And
yeah,
look, again, I don't know if she's innocent or guilty, but I would say that rarely in my experience does the story not change at all. Zero. She's told it for going on 15, 16 years or more. She's
yeah.
18 years. She's never changed the story.
And that's what we look for when
Yeah.
and from an investigative standpoint is that, when someone's telling lies or when someone is, crafting stories, oftentimes, it's hard to recall specifically what you say in a previous interview if you're
Mm.
lying about it. Because remember, you have to create the narrative. It's not coming from your
Yeah.
declarative memory. It's not coming from your memory. It's being created. It's being, so when that's why well, investigators, good ones, will have someone sort of like they go through the process and tell the story of what happened, and then they allow some time to pass, and then they ask the suspect or the witness, whoever they're interviewing, why don't you tell me that story and let's go in the reverse. Let's tell it. I want you to start at the end, okay, and I want you to work backwards. If someone's lying, we know this from the cognitive neuroscience, they have a much more difficult time recreating the same story in the reverse, in the same
Yeah,
sequence. Does
that's
that make
interesting.
sense?
Yeah, that's
And
interesting. They don't do that. What the police
yeah,
do, and I'm sure it's something you've encountered, Craig, is they do that sort of, tell me about this, tell me about that. Now, what happened today? And then they move you away and say, tell me about high school. Did you go to high school locally? And then they circle back to the story again. And they kind of do it almost
yeah,
like shamefully through the course of these 20 to 30-minute interviews. They kind of ask the question, click their pens 50 times, lots of ums and ahs, and they don't know what to say. You can clearly hear the sheriffs are baffled. I mean,
yeah,
in these, you can see them going, geez, we've got this kid. Their brain is saying, we've got this kid who's told us they've seen their mother drown, Adriana.
yeah, yeah.
But the mom is not budging here. And she's pretty convincing, and she's passed a polygraph. Sorry,
And
Dan.
had one phone call been made from the grandparents to the mother to say, "Hey," like, because that's her son,
Mm.
"We're gonna stop by the police and have a little visit." How do you
You
feel about that? So that
I
phone call, you know, a courtesy,
um,
like, I mean,
um,
look,
yeah, Amanda, this is how it plays out, because I've spoken to Brenda, the grandmother, and I've spoken to Amanda, and I've seen and read lots about Chuck. He's yet to respond to our phone calls. Surprise, surprise. Anyway,
Chuck, I'm
I know
very disappointed.
Chuck is not going to want to talk to me. Let's just because the questions are going to be tough, and he
Yeah,
knows it.
right. They're going to be hard
Um,
questions. Yeah,
Brenda says the grandmother Amanda's on her way to Bay Medical. Poor Adriana's being airlifted. They get a pulse. There is a moment where they think that she may
hmm,
come through and that the hope is in the air.
yeah,
Brenda's distraught. She locks her keys in her car. Look, her granddaughter's just been airlifted away. Chuck is there, probably looking like the hero. He's told to grab AJ because the police say, well, Brenda can't go. She's got to deal with her car. AJ, we got to get him out of this scene. Chuck drives off alone with AJ. He's the caregiver. He's the nominated caregiver right?
Yeah.
They're alone long enough. Brenda says by the time she got home to Alabama, which is a half an hour away, I think was how long she was gone before she got in her car and drove up there, that Chuck had already called the police and had already gotten this story and made arrangements to drive back to Florida and tell the story. Okay, cool, great. Maybe within their relationship, he wears the trousers and he tells her what to do, and perhaps maybe she just followed the lead and unwittingly put her daughter in jail for the rest of her life, and lost her grandchild. Perhaps that's what happened. The sheriff says, no, I took the call from Brenda. The handwriting on the fax that is sent over from Chuck's fax machine clearly has a female handwriting giving information about the case. It's clearly a female. It's not Chuck's handwriting. Just to be very clear. Chuck, there's no way he wrote this neat. This literally clearly looks like a female's handwriting. So somewhere along the line, people were trying to help the police. And I think that perhaps Brenda was trying to help the sheriffs to free her daughter. These are law-abiding people. You know what I mean? It was just average folk in northern Florida. So I actually went to Brenda pretty hard, and I said to her, hey, look, here's the problem I've got. You've got AJ staying with you. AJ went back to the grandparents' house and stayed with them. The following day, she was told to drive back to Florida with AJ and attend a child services thing.
Interview, yeah.
And I said, why did you go? She said, because I was told to go. I said, why did you cross state lines knowing you were going to give up your grandson? And she said, because they told me to. Child services in Florida. I said, in Florida. And she goes, if I had known that I didn't have to, I wouldn't have.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, you don't have to.
I think that's kind of the story of this whole tale. Because look, hey, when the coroner and when the coroner left the state, they never even subpoenaed him. He went back up to New Jersey where he's doing crappy autopsies up there. He was never even called to testify.
But he was available. Yeah,
of course he was available. He's still an active coroner today. You can Google him.
Yeah, so he's
Yeah. So, he knew he didn't have to come back to the state, but the general population doesn't know the law. She trusted the prosecutor.
Well, generally, like even in a criminal case like this, even if he is out of state, like in this case, the coroner, if the prosecution subpoenaed him, he would be required to appear.
Well, that's not the way it's been presented to me, and I've been trying to look at the law in that.
Yeah,
I think Florida law may be different here. Tell me if I'm wrong, Craig.
It's possible.
Yeah.
But so the whole issue of you're talking about he's in a different state, so he's sort of protected. I think, there are workarounds for this. And I think, again, the court can issue an order. So generally, like subpoenas, just in a general sense, do people have to comply with a subpoena? Well, the answer technically is they don't. They can refuse. Now, depending on whether they're a professional or they're a lay person. Professionals, we generally, if we get subpoenaed, a lot of times if there's a confidentiality issue involved in the material that we're going to disclose, we would decline and say that we're protecting the privacy of our the client's information. The only way we would turn something over would be through the court order. So a court order is issued by the court that you have to comply with that. And any U.S. citizen or anybody that would be ordered by the court, they do have to comply with a court order. And if they don't comply with a lawful court order, they can be held in contempt of court. So there's some mechanisms, and again, Florida law there could be some, like you said, there could be some.
Well, either way,
Florida law.
Either way, yeah.
I just feel. Did they actually? Did they try to get him, or did they just say they couldn't because maybe there was a statutory scheme that said, nope, he's unavailable because he's out of state now and we can't pull him back?
Certainly the prosecutor never tried or never wanted him there. But the defense they never even called him. And when I spoke to Walter Smith and I said, why didn't you call Siebert in? And he said he wouldn't have had to come. There was no way I could get him there. I could have put him down. He said, but he left the state. He wasn't required. He
Okay,
wasn't
so
the active corner. He wasn't
there must
required
be,
to do
yeah.
that.
So again,
Yeah.
you probably know this, and I think in the
I,
UK, I mean, your legal system in the UK is a little similar to the US, but you don't have states. You don't have different states. You have like a crown court, and you
no.
have like right, or do
Yeah.
you have? It's a very yeah. So
Yeah, we have the Crown Court,
the
which
thing
is
about
this would have been a Crown case. So
yeah,
so
but a crown case
you
and
would essentially have to have left. You would have had to have left the UK essentially,
UK, right? But if
and
you're
Scotland's a
anywhere
bit
in the
different.
UK,
Or England and Scotland's
yes.
different. Yeah,
Okay, gotcha. Well,
yeah,
in the U.S., as you know, at the state court level, we're not talking about a federal case here. We're talking about a case that's in the state courts, and this is a state court case, by the
yeah,
way. Right? It's in a Florida county,
yeah.
superior court, likely in whatever county. Um, the state law controls, right, for those criminal proceedings, and so there could be statutory schemes in place in Florida that, in their rules of criminal procedure, right, that do not allow for a prosecutor or a defense attorney to recall a witness or call a witness that's situated outside the state of Florida, for example. Um, so that's
I don't know.
possible. Yeah, and again, I'd have to research the law in that area because I'm not,
But even so,
yeah.
Siebert arrives, and he would have got the grilling of all grillings
Oh,
because
yeah.
he's got
Huge.
he's got a pretty poor track record, but he probably still would have stuck by he would have stuck by his findings. But this case that happened only the year before, Martin Lee Anderson, Walter Smith, who was Amanda's defense attorney, was also the defense attorney on that case and won it. So this is a very small community, a very, very, very small community where the judge goes to the same church as the sheriff. And the sheriff was asked to bring the lunch menu into the deliberation room because there's only one other clerk and they were handling another court case next door. Do you see what I mean? And that's not uncommon in small jurisdictions, from what I understand. It's not unusual for the local sheriff to help out. They all help each other out. They're all in this. Well, let me rephrase that. They're all working as a team. I was going to say they're all in it together, but that makes it sound as if there's something corrupt. And I'm not suggesting it's corrupt. It just seems to be a very perfect storm of events where every juror knew this phony news story, which was untrue. And interesting enough, one of the jurors tells the judge, they said, "Do you have a problem with a 6-year-old testifying?" And one of the jurors said, "I testified in court as well when I was a young kid, when I was 6 years old, so I'm okay with it." It's unclear
That's not
which.
the yeah, that's
It's
not the standard we usually follow. I just want to
Yeah,
point out, I always like to research things, right? Before so while you were chatting, I just looked at some relevant
cool.
statutes.
Interesting.
And so what I'm going to tell you, and this again is based on just some quick,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
on a legal research database, is that, and I had thought this was true, but I wanted to verify it. So there's this, it's called the Uniform Act to Secure Attendance of Witnesses from Without a State in Criminal Proceedings. So in other words, this act, and it does apply in Florida. So the prosecutor could have filed a motion with the court, that local court,
A defense attorney in this case.
or the defense attorney, either one, because if the defense attorney wants it, I think they would have the same right to do this. They would file the motion, and they have to, in that motion, they have to describe why this witness is material and necessary, right, in the particular case. And then they have to go through, there's a hearing for it. But what I'm pointing out is it looks like there is a mechanism that allows it. It's actually Florida statute section 942.01, and hopefully that's the correct statute. But so, yeah, there's a mechanism in place, it looks like,
Interesting.
to do this. But again, I'm not a Florida lawyer, so I don't,
Yeah. Now,
I
now,
can't
Craig,
speak to this specifically. But
she's exhausted her appeals in Florida. Okay.
yeah,
So one of them she filed, it was poor. It was from another public attorney who did a bad job. The next one that they have something called a post-conviction timeout, and you might know more about this stuff. You can explain it, but she managed through some of her followers and friends and really lovely people who donated their money to help Amanda, because there's a big outpour of people saying there's some bullshit here.
yeah,
They
yeah.
raised $3,000, which was an enormous amount of money for people in northern Florida. This is one of the
Oh, well,
poorest
that's not
areas
going
in
to
the
be
state.
enough. Yeah, that's going to be.
Well, it's not going to be enough, but it's an enormous amount of money, right?
Yeah,
They raised that, got a bit of a charlatan who then took his time, and the second appeal kind of timed out from how whatever happened, how that happened, I'm not going to get into detail, but it timed out. And part of it
Yeah.
was because of how they filed. Part of it was because of how the administration of the receiving the information in Florida was so backlogged. So somehow it's kind of unclear as to whose fault it was, but it was partially the state of Florida's
Yeah.
fault. It
Oh,
timed
man.
out, and she had no other appeals. So what would you do? Do you have a federal appeal? Do I make a phone call to DeSantis? What, January 23rd, do I call Dawn? Do you know what I mean? Like what
Yeah.
what's the
Yeah.
choices for Amanda? What legally could you offer any advice? I know I'm putting you on the spot here, buddy, but
It's hard. Well, it's hard just because, again, the rules of criminal procedure in Florida are different than, say, in California. I mean, there's some similarities and crossovers, but again, going back to some of these, these reversible errors, as we call them, so errors that are occurring during the process, during the trial, during the investigation, so the issue around, the competency issue around the child, whether or not do we have a clear understanding of whether he actually was competent to give testimony in this case. And I'm not sure about that based on, what we've talked about. That's the one issue that I think, these are key sort of points and of things that we would raise, if you were to file this motion. And what you were seeking, you would be seeking a new trial, essentially, right? And the second thing is this issue with the coroner not being this whole thing about the coroner, the credibility of the coroner, the actual autopsy in the first place. Like, you've raised all these issues. These are things that, like, if these things were addressed properly, right, you may have seen a different outcome in this trial. Again, I don't know, because you would have to do it to see what happens, but it certainly seems like there are lots of triable issues here that didn't get adequately litigated because, again, witnesses were not properly vetted. In this case, like in the case of the witness, the prime witness here, I don't know. Dana probably has some things to say about this as well, about this child's competence. I'm not sure, because I don't now. There's questions about what was his mental age. Like, we should have probably looked at that. They should have looked at that a little more carefully before, and then done a psychological evaluation. Make sure this child doesn't have, there's not some magical thinking going on, or things that are this fantastic, because you just mentioned that thing earlier about the army troopers and stuff, that he told that story initially. Remember, children, they fantasize a lot, right? There's a lot of fantasy in terms of the way that they think about things in the world. So that's concerning to me. I don't know. What do you think?
Well, it's just a heartbreaking case, and just looking, so all the pressure that AJ, all the pressure that was put on him, I can't even imagine, and I would never put a child through that. He wasn't appropriately evaluated, and now we know, what are we, like 16 plus years later, as forensic psychologists, we, this emerging profession, we know so much more now. And there are procedures set in place, and there wasn't in this case. And we would do things differently now. I can tell you, they should have had a forensic psychologist in this case. How now we're here. This is heartbreaking. So we know, like, I think the point of this podcast is to share this information and really have people do some critical thinking. There are errors in this case. It should have yielded a different outcome. These are, and so where do we go now? And so this is potentially, I know we're sort of out of time today, but if we want to do a second episode and bring Eric Zelaya into it, I think, like, where do we go from here is the question. Now that we're talking about all this, and you've done I've
I think
researched, is it
if
possible to change this outcome?
that's the number one question, because that's what Georgetown
That's
University
what I was
and the
going to ask
Making
you.
of Sonnery program.
Yeah.
And I'm working closely with them as one of their researchers, and we have an investigator in Alabama who lives very close to the area, and the sort of four of us are working as a team, and they have a lawyer team that's working with others. I don't want to reveal too much information there because we're hoping for some big news soon. We're hoping to at least get it looked at by people who know more about the law than I do. But
Well, yeah.
the second I saw this kid's full testimony, and I would say to anybody who's listening today or down the line, whoever Googles this case and finds this podcast, watch the court TV. You can just Google Amanda Lewis court TV. It'll come up. There's a 2020 special on YouTube that's free to view. It's called What AJ Saw. There's a lot of information in there to just watch the child. Now, I think the good news story here is that AJ is he's a very smart young man who volunteers at the local fire department. He's a good kid. He's getting married. He's healthy. He's happy. Amanda Lewis in prison is really pleased. She doesn't blame him. She knows what happened. And if you watch that testimony, he is not damning his mother. He is just hanging on for dear life, retelling a story that he knows he's told before and trying to grasp on to the facts of that story. He's been told his mother killed his sister. That's clear. He's also told police that his mother dunked his sister, and that could have been a week before. Or, it's really unclear. And Amanda doesn't blame AJ. And I think that's a testimony to her. She's upset at the system. She's not upset at her son. And I think that to me is sort of the most heartbreaking thing. The grandparents, when you speak to them, they cry because they haven't seen their grandson. The aunties, the uncles, everybody is in tears over this. So it's not just the horrible death of this young girl, whether by her own accident or mistake or whatever. Or even if AJ accidentally, something had happened at the pool and he panicked too and ran away rather than helping us. These are children. Anything could have happened. And again, Amanda could have done this. I'm not suggesting she didn't. She was convicted for it. But the testimony and the way we got here is one of the dirtiest bits of play I have ever seen. I've never seen anything like this. And it makes me wonder that anyone can be convicted at any time. And it's frightening.
Yeah. What you shared here is far more than what I watched when I was, preparing for this in terms of, what Pierce Morgan, I watched the Pierce Morgan interview and the narration of that, but the further context that you provided here, like just maybe speaking as a lawyer right now, not as a psychologist, I'm just like, wow. I mean, this should not have happened. Like this, in terms of these procedural things that errors really should not have happened.
Let's do some review. We'll catch up offline. Maybe circle back. We'll circle back around like the Holmes County Sheriff does with his interview technique. We'll circle back around to this later. We'll get Eric in on this. I'm still gathering more information. Yeah, I'm still gathering more information. Still getting more together. What you said today about having the coroner come back.
That's huge.
To me, that might be grounds for retrial.
Yeah,
I don't know. Or collectively, there might be some. I'm going to go back to Georgetown.
I would have to do more thorough legal research. Again, because I'm not familiar with Florida law, so I want to make that clear. Like I'm not, and I don't. I'm not here giving legal advice or anything like that either.
Disclaimer.
Disclaimer, because I'm not.
I've tried my best. I've tried my best to tell the whole truth and nothing but. And I may have gotten some dates and times and people's names wrong.
Yeah.
But actually, I believe everything I've said today is of absolute fact and what we've uncovered. And hopefully it'll be part of a retrial, and we can actually go back and show this is what we found and where it went wrong. But guys, cool. You know what?
Yeah. I'm going to do some research now. Yeah,
thanks for chatting. This one is one for the books. It really is. And this poor woman's been in prison, all this time. And I'm not even sure there was a crime committed. I'm not even sure anything wrong what happened other than a horrible tragedy. So, and I find this often with women cases. There's a lot of female cases like this where sometimes there isn't even a crime and people are being convicted. Again, that's one for a longer episode, but this is another one we put in those books.
Yeah, real quick. I know we're out of time, but did the Innocence Project ever look at this case? I know the Georgetown, University, but did the Innocence Project ever take a look at it or did they just say no? We're not.
Intriguing enough, the gentleman who runs the Florida Innocence Project, his name is Brandon Scheck. Ring a bell? The last name might be famous amongst lawyers in California. Anyway,
yes.
He runs
I
the
know what you're
Florida Innocence Project, and they are really focused on the DNA stuff. They have such
Yeah.
a backlog of DNA cases that
Yeah.
I think is with all. I think they would
This
love to
isn't a
pick up this
DNA
case.
case. I get it. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. Okay.
this is not a
Yeah.
DNA case. They would love
Yeah.
to probably pick this one up and help us out. But the fact of the matter is, I think all of their resources now, the tremendous backlog
Yeah. That
of
makes
DNA
sense. That makes
cases.
sense.
And
Wow.
maybe one day we'll be in a better position in the judicial system where this one would get the attention it deserves from the Innocence Project. But at the moment, unfortunately
Yeah.
not. And that's why Georgetown are the saviors. Good on
Well, that's
Georgetown.
good. Yeah. That's great that
Yeah.
they're taking the lead on this.
Yeah.
Well, there's so much we can learn from this case and do things differently. So I am eager to do a part 2 with this and see where we're at, because I am still have more questions. But I really appreciate your time here today, and I can't wait to follow up.
Oh,
So thank you so much.
thanks for having me, guys. Always fun, and it is like the middle of the night here in the UK. And I
I know. I
know
was
I
going to
can
say, you're
see
like, yeah, it's like,
you guys
what,
are out
10
there in the
o'clock?
sunshine in California. I hate you both. I hate you both.
It's cold here, though, where it's cold right now.
Thank you. Thanks for listening. For episode details and merch, check out killerpsychologistpodcast.com. And for forensic services, you can book online at psychologydr.com. That's psychologydoctor.com.